Hello, everybody. It is Monday night. It is 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which means it is time for Iron Culture Live, presented by Mass. I am here with the good Dr. Eric Helms. Helms, how are we doing tonight?
You know what? I'm in good spirits. We've gotten good feedback on the mass issue. I just launched my new vlog series on the 3D Muscle Journey YouTube channel for my contest prep. Um, Bright future, good things happening, and you know what? I'm going to focus on those things rather than some of the other things that we're going to talk about, at least to start the podcast.
Yeah, so what is the nature of this vlogging? What's the occasion?
The occasion is that I am competing this year. It is my proper pro debut, and it did take me a little time to actually get the vlog started. I've actually been dieting since mid-April, so I think I'm on my seventh or eighth week. So the first entry was, "Hey, I've been dieting for 6 weeks. Sorry it took me so long to get the vlog out." But with the travel that we both did to Texas and me to the States generally, and then you met Brandon, who was filming that event, who is also our audiovisual content mastermind. Well, I should say probably Andrew is the mastermind, but he is the partner in that endeavor. They were both moving as well, so I wanted to not be like, "Hey, edit this video while you're on a plane" or anything like that. So I wanted to give them some space and time. So yeah, that's the occasion. Just me actually documenting the fruits of my off-season labor and seeing if it's enough to not get stomped too bad by the WBF pro ranks.
Well, speaking of giving people some space, this is a new experiment for me. We've got Chai the cat in the room during the recording. She's
Oh.
normally her mother is taking care of her when I'm recording, but her mother is out, and Chai, she's one of those cats who her entire life she has only known having a parent working from home. So her understanding is that she gets human face to face time 24 hours a day for her entire existence. So we're going to see how this goes, and hopefully she's not too disruptive here, but it'll be an experiment.
Well, as also a prior cat dad who recently had my two cats finish their existence. I will put that kindly for our children listeners who are not aware of how life and death works yet. It's awesome that she's here. We can call this Tea Time with Chai, and
Yeah.
she can be our third unofficial host right now. I mean, she's not Omar, but I love me a cat. So maybe
Yeah.
we get a little cat cam, and for the YouTube viewers, we'll be able to give them a little more visual engagement.
Yeah, we'll see if there's a good moment to get her up on screen. She will be a star. She's a lovely cat, very very sweet. But yeah, she's a snuggler, and I just couldn't shut the door on her. Well, Helms, glad to hear that you got some vlogs going up over at 3DMJ. Good to hear the news and updates. Anything else going on, or should I share what's new in my world?
Well, no, actually, well, it's not my world specifically, but there's a lot going on. Those who follow the King of the Lifts podcast, which is awesome, that's hosted by Ryan Lapidat and myself, and a few others are kind of rotating guest hosts depending upon the topic. We just dropped two nearly 3 hour episodes doing a IPF Classic Worlds preview, the men and the women's episode. That was with me, legendary coach Matt Gary, Ryan, who will be commentating at Worlds, as well as Rory Lynch, who will be there representing Team New Zealand as one of our coaches. And it's a very, very exciting Worlds. And I know, like, you only hear tangentially about the modern. There we go. Folks, I'm going to interrupt myself. We've got Chai on camera, and she's adorable. I love me a great tabby. Oh, and the audio, SMR. Did you hear those
Yeah,
purrs, folks? This
heavy
is a treat.
purrs. Yeah, absolutely.
So clearly a powerlifting fan is what I'm taking from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a very, very exciting world. I know your exposure to modern powerlifting is tangentially through me, so I'm just going to throw out some shocking numbers. In the 84 plus women's class, we are probably going to see, my guess is a 300 kilo or higher deadlift. Done by Natalie Lalai from Australia, who will probably be pulling something like that to get on the podium. And then the top two, maybe top three, are probably going to be the top two definitely going to be cracking over the 700 kilo mark with a likely 700 pound plus squat that's over 317 and a half. by Sonita Mulla. And then Canada's Brittany Schlater is looking amazing. And she's basically good in all three disciplines. And she's going to be giving Sonita a really good run for her money. That's just nuts to hear those from women's numbers, 300 plus kilo squats and deadlifts. Joe Borenstein, fresh off of his triumphant performance at Powerlifting Nationals, totaled 900 kilos as an 83 kilo junior. And now he's going to go for his first time at Worlds to see if he can win an open world title and potentially be competing against Austin Perkins to see who can get best lifter. Austin Perkins, 74 kilo lifter. He's the second coming of the modern era of Taylor Atwood. His best total is around 850 at 74, and we're going to see what he can do. I think he's going to let the rope out, even though it's Worlds, because he's so far ahead of the rest of the field that he is pretty much running his own race.
Yeah.
Other amazing things, Agata Sitko, she's dropped down to the 69s, looking to win a second world title in a second weight class, probably going to be totaling in the 610 to 620 range at a 69 kilo woman. That's nuts. And Chel Becklin looking to grab a 66 kilo world title. He dropped down from 74, totaled 770 at 66 at Sheffield. And we even have another one of these acts of weight class manipulation. Kasim Sand from Thailand typically is a 66 kilo lifter who totals just over 700. He's dropping down to 59, and he has been just nearly on body weight, totaling in the high 600s. So some of these world records that have been standing for a long time in the 59 kilo class are probably going to fall. And we're seeing what we have seen in weightlifting for a long time, where especially in the light heavyweight, middleweight, and even more so in the lightweight categories, that we're seeing people who can maintain a very low body fat and still perform rising to the kind of the cream of the crop. There was actually a mass research review article I wrote, I think back in 2018 or 2019, where I mentioned the same relationship between body fat, lean mass, performance that we see in weightlifting is not quite showing up in powerlifting. And it has been just a matter of time for that to happen with the influx of participation. So anyway, those are some other really big things happening. Make sure you guys catch the live stream of Worlds. It's probably going to be the most impressive one to date. It's going on in Germany, and it'll be multiple days of really, really impressive battles across all weight classes. And if you want to listen to the preview, definitely check out those King of the Lifts episodes. So I think that was all I was supposed to bring up. Am I forgetting anything, Trex? Oh, no. Yeah, one thing. I did forget one thing, actually. Okay. Mass research review. We just dropped our first of the month, never late issue. Just technically yesterday was when we were supposed to have dropped it, but it actually came out 2 days early because we're chronically early. We just can't help it. And we've gotten some good feedback.
Oh yeah,
I've got time. I got some props on my call out to Karl Popper and the kind of philosophy of science in my discussion of the eccentric. But I think we've covered that pretty in depth. But I'm on the understanding that you also got some positive feedback, and there may be even additional news about some of your work.
Yeah, a lot of good feedback. Let's see. Help me walk down memory lane here. So certainly there was the cover story about TRT, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which early returns are good. There was a lot of discussion. A lot of people honestly were annoyed just by the cover article, or just had some strong feelings just from the cover itself before the article was even. I know they hadn't read it because we teased the cover before anyone could read it, unless they're hacking into our personal files. So before it was released, there was already strong feelings about the article, because I knew there would be, because it's a kind of a hot topic right now. But so far the returns have been good. I feel like I threaded the needle and kind of was able. I mean, I kind of gave my read of the situation, and I think it appeased people who generally are annoyed about a few elements of this kind of new proliferation and popularization of TRT. I think there's certainly a lot of folks who are just, especially clinicians, are just annoyed that people are like, well, I'm just kind of on TRT. And it's like, brother, you're on steroids. Like you've never had any reason to believe you have low testosterone. You've never been tested for having low testosterone. You
This
are
is not prescribed.
yeah, this is not prescribed by your doctor. This is, you're taking, 600 milligrams a week, which is not a typical TRT dose. Like if we tested your testosterone right now, it'd probably be about double the reference range. You're just on steroids. A lot of people have kind of used TRT as a colloquial term to say like, I'm on steroids, but not with the intention to win Mr. Olympia,
My
which is,
dose could be higher.
yeah, like I could push this harder and jack my hematocrit into the 60s if I felt so inclined, and add 500 grams to my prostate. So like, yeah, there's a lot of people misusing just the general term and concept of TRT. There's this whole other faction of people who are, in this kind of natty or not, now there's like a third category, natty, not natty, TRT-ish, which is basically just the people who are always on that fringe where people are like, I think this person might be on steroids. Now they're just getting binned into this like, well, I guess they're on low dose steroids, which in many cases just doesn't make sense. It's like people who it's like, well, if they're going to go on steroids, why wouldn't they just go, And I think the biggest reason I wanted to write the article was, first of all, I've seen a lot of folks acting like if you are actually prescribed TRT, I've seen a lot of like stigmatizing what that is. So like there are some people for whom TRT is a warranted clinical treatment that would be worth pursuing in order to rectify symptoms that are caused by clinically low testosterone. And there's been a lot of folks who, because they're annoyed that young, healthy people are just doing low dose steroids, they're kind of putting out a lot of really, I would say, exaggerated claims about what TRT does, both in the positive and in the negative. So people saying it's TRT, you're essentially on steroids. Well, it's like, well, I mean, if you had low testosterone and you go on a dose that's supposed to get you to like 500, 600 nanograms per deciliter, you will be visually and functionally not discernible from the population of folks with normal testosterone levels. So there's a huge misconception about like, well, if I use TRT to get me from 250 to 600 nanograms per deciliter, what should I expect in terms of my physique? The answer is honestly not much. Maybe we're talking about a kilogram or two of fat-free mass, which to the naked eye, if you're not like ultra into, physiques, it's not really even going to be discernible, to be totally honest. So a lot of misconceptions about what it brings on the muscular end of things. A lot of misconceptions also about like the potential downsides. So like I've heard people say like, well, if a person with low testosterone goes on TRT, you better be careful because that's a decision you're making for life. You are going to permanently wreck your ability to create testosterone, which is, I would consider something in the rare category of double wrong, in the sense that we have no reason to believe that, going on low doses would necessarily shut that down forever. Usually what people are referring to is like IFBB pros who are taking like a gram of test a week for their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And now it's like after that, they're like, okay, I didn't cycle off for 20 years and my body just doesn't do this anymore. Which is, I think, a pretty understudied thing. I'd like to learn more about how and why that happens. But nonetheless, there's certainly enough anecdotes where people seem to, after 30 years of heavy steroid use, they do seem to kind of need to be on TRT, although I've never looked at their blood tests. So I've never honestly seen, like, what does need look like for them? Are they just annoyed when they're down at 400 and they're like, I don't feel like I have the juice anymore? I have no idea. Anyway,
I do wonder how much that is. I don't want to be doing what I had to do to be Mr. Olympia, but my perspective on what is normal, muscular, and how I would like to look is so skewed, and I have the maybe slightly suppressed or quote-unquote normal levels you'd expect from someone who's now retired from sport in their 40s and 50s, and I know all the right people to get a legit script just to keep me around 1,000, Like,
yeah.
I wonder if that's what's going on.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I haven't run into a lot of literature on that particular instance because it's such a unique thing. Or it's something that people don't really like to get into clinical trials about, right? Like, hey, have you been abusing steroids for at least 25 years? Come by.
Hmm.
But anyway, there's really no reason to believe that like trying out TRT under the supervision of a clinician would have some impact on shutting down your natural testosterone production in a permanent manner. And also, the reason I say it's double wrong is you're going there because you're not making testosterone at an adequate level. So what the hell do you care about? Well, what if my body no longer is going to create all the testosterone I need? It literally already doesn't. That is why you're doing it. So there's literally nothing to lose there. So yeah, my article just kind of dives into a lot of the misconceptions about these really hyped up, a lot of people who are really overstating some of the potential downsides and kind of assuming that you're doing doses that are not TRT and you're not working with a clinician, which is not how TRT works. And then certainly a lot of other people who are just overstating what it will do for your physique. Because Helms, you have mentioned this before, but there's been some studies that look at like dudes who go on TRT, not just like because they're interested and curious, people who go on it because they have clinically low testosterone, and a year later, only 15% are still taking it. And it's not because they had these dramatic side effects that were intolerable. It's that it was just kind of boring. They were like, this isn't really doing that much for me. It turns out I was overstating how much I thought I would feel differently if I increased my testosterone by 300 nanograms per deciliter. I'm good. Like, I don't really want to do this anymore. So that issue's gotten some really good feedback. And then, of course, Helms. I don't want to forget. So there was that one. There was the lean mass hyper responder. What was my other one? The cold exposure one. Yeah.
Yeah. You were talking about how heat is kicking cold's booty.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of a heat guy now. I'm not like I think there's a lot of totally overstated claims about the benefits of sauna and even hot water immersion. But if I had to pick one to just kind of play around with and say, oh, this seems interesting, maybe I'll give it a shot, I'm definitely more of a heat guy for the vast majority of health and fitness oriented contexts. I think it's really inexplicable that cold exposure in the form of ice baths has had such a moment because the data just aren't very good for it. And if you're thinking about using cold exposure as a fat loss tool, the study I reviewed is one of multiple now that has shown more likely than not, it's not just that cold exposure is not going to help you lose weight. It is more likely to actually induce passive weight gain rather than weight loss. So I would highly discourage people from trying to pursue that strategy, no matter how fun it sounds when you plan out the mechanisms. But Helms,
Tim Ferriss and shambles.
Absolutely. But the big one, Helms, was pick up my train of thought for me. I was going to talk
lean mass hyper responders.
Oh Lord,
and
lean mass.
That link you sent us in the Slack.
Yeah, lean mass hyper responders, all about what happens when people who have super high LDL, low triglycerides, high HDL. So what happens when these people who tend to be lean, for some reason, that's the way they were recruited. What happens when these individuals, this is kind of a response to a ketogenic diet, is that you have the sky high LDL, low triglycerides, high HDL. You're a generally lean person. What happens if we follow you for a year and look at your plaque accumulation within your arteries, which of course over time leads to atherosclerotic heart disease? And the answer is exactly what you'd expect from any population that has sky high LDL. Very rapid rates of plaque progression. And so what was crazy about this paper, my article kind of just documents like the chaos of this article in terms of its release and, all of the chatter about it online. It was truly quite a sight to behold. So it was just chaotic. The paper got leaked, which I have no idea how that happened. It got leaked in a way that was formatted for the journal. And they're like, there was all this discussion kind of tearing it apart. The senior author did a YouTube interview and was like, well, I've never approved this article in any form. So whatever document you're referring to, I'm not bound to it in any way, essentially. I'm paraphrasing. But the reality is by the time an article gets to the journal, every author, like every journal I've ever submitted to, there's very clear language that says, by submitting this article, you affirm and absolutely assure us that all authors approve the article in its current form and take responsibility for the data in the way it's reported. So it's just this really weird thing where literally in an interview, the senior author was expressing disapproval that the lead author had shared unpublished data about it because they didn't report their primary outcome.
Which is it's a comedy of errors when you look at this, but B, it is also a good reminder for us of why, us being science, of why some of the things that have occurred in the publisher parish environment, more is better kind of modern publishing environment, are not ideal.
Yeah.
Like the number of authors on the typical paper from the 1970s was 1 to 3. Now it is often double digits,
Yeah.
and they've had to create, like, they didn't used to have citation formats where they went, okay, we've got to cut it off after 6 and just put et al. For endnote.
Yeah.
But they have that now. And I am highly critical of papers that have, unless it's like a multi-site data collection, like I can understand it, these big projects, or certain types of papers, there's exceptions to what I'm saying, but the typical paper where it's like, did you enter the lab and give a thumbs up during a 1RM test on week 6? Sweet, you're 18th author on this paper. Because I do think there are times where things are getting published where, oh, I forgot to check with all the authors because there's so many bloody of them.
Yeah.
And I think we really do need to follow collectively the ICMJE like guidelines.
Yeah.
And actually pay attention to some of these things instead of just making everything a publication for everyone ever.
Yeah. To be fair, the senior author could very well have been telling a completely true thing when he said, I have never signed off on this or approved it. But that alone, like in the bro code of the bro and cis code of researchers, is a huge faux pas. You do not publish,
Yes.
you don't submit a paper, especially without the senior author's blessing. Highly irregular. And then the paper came out, they didn't report their main pre-registered outcome, which is a huge faux pas. It's the whole point of pre-registration, is so that you won't do that. And so then the lead author was sharing it online, and then the senior author was being asked about it in a podcast, and he's like, I've never heard those numbers in my life. I'm not going to necessarily commit to them actually being true because I don't know what you're referring to. He's like, I'm referring to your paper. And he's like, yeah, it was chaos. But anyway, the initial spin, and there's language in the paper basically saying like, yeah, most of these people had pretty minimal plaque progression, so like things are good. And then like there's this backlash where people are like, this looks like a very high risk cohort with extremely rapid progression at the mean level, and there is heterogeneity because there's always heterogeneity, but it's not remarkable heterogeneity, and it just looks like a group of people that accumulated a shitload of plaque very, very quickly. And in 10 years, they're going to be in a bad spot. And in 30 years, they're going to be in a really bad spot if they keep this up. And so then, Helms, the thing I sent you, which I just couldn't believe, was one of the authors of the paper giving a presentation since it was published, I believe, and basically saying, so here's the plaque progression data from our paper. And one of the things that's weird about it is the numbers seem to indicate a rate of plaque progression that is just implausibly fast. And so like his argument now, looking at his own data, is like, there's no way that plaque actually accumulated this quickly just because that's what we observed with what we considered to be top of the line measurements. And so in light of this, cognitive dissonance and this challenging notion, he basically said like, I don't know. I have a big Facebook group. Everyone seems fine. We all have super high LDL on ketogenic diet. So like, I don't know. What are you going to go with? The fact that I know at least a few thousand people who are currently alive in this Facebook group, or this data indicating that they're all screwed in 25 years. And surprisingly, that did not result in a bunch of boos and a big cartoonish hook yanking him off the stage. Because it was a keto-oriented conference. But basically, that paper, start to finish, was a train wreck, an absolute disaster. And
Yeah.
I shouldn't say start to finish. I would say start to present moment, because after the finish, which was publishing it, there was this whole scattered kind of PR campaign of saying, our data show this. No, it actually shows that. There was one instance where an author basically initially was like, oh, this is all great data, and then conceded on Twitter, actually, this is a pretty high risk cohort based on the rate of progression, and then deleted that and said, actually, I fed the table into both Grok and ChatGPT, and they didn't seem to be concerned about it. So, like, let's go with that. And the reality is, these are large language models that are predicting the next word and the next sequence of words. And frankly, if you feed them a table and kind of prime them to be pro keto, they're going to go grab all the toilet bowl of the internet information on keto, which is extremely, a bunch of LDL denialism, totally pseudoscience quackery. And it's going to say, well, that's the most probable thing to come next in this sentence, because the number of hyped up but fundamentally stupid articles on this topic on the internet and in any training data set for a large language model are infinitely higher than just good old fashioned boring articles saying, like, yeah, you probably don't want your LDL to be 400 for 40 years.
So what you're actually saying is this train wreck is the car is still tumbling. The train wreck
Oh,
is
yeah.
not over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like we're this is mid slow-mo NASCAR crash. It's still happening.
Yeah, it's there's a scene in Arrested Development. Do you ever watch that show, Helms?
Fantastic show.
There
Yes.
was a scene, I forget the exact context, but Tobias was taking quite a beating, and he said, "How am I still conscious?" Just waiting for the sweet reprieve of just losing consciousness to set in. I feel like this kind of car wreck or train wreck we're describing is at that point where you're like, how is this car still tumbling? And yet it is. So if you want to learn more about all the ins and outs of that absolutely chaotic instance of research, this new issue of Mass is right up your alley.
And if I can just back you up, so you sent us the link to this conference presentation by this guy, and I remember it because he plots this cohort, and his main point was, these guys are in their mid 50s, so like 54 years on average, and they have this plaque value, and then after a year, it had increased on average 43%. Now, if you plot that backwards, that means a decade ago they had a really low plaque level, lower than you'd anticipate in someone who is in their mid 40s as a male. And I'm like, well, hold on. These are specifically like lean mass hyperresponders, which just means lean guys. So very healthy, lean people 10 years ago, presumably when far fewer of them were on a ketogenic diet and by definition had been on a ketogenic diet for a decade less time, they had really low plaque levels. Interesting. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't like that squares with my prediction. And then he's like, also, if you extrapolate it out to another 10 years from now, they'd have astronomically high levels of LDL. And that's where he said, and we've got a Facebook group, which includes me, by the way, and I've been on a ketogenic diet for this long, and we seem to be doing fine. Like, what does that mean? I haven't had a heart attack yet.
Yeah.
When we talk about the lack of awareness in someone who is publishing on this about the difference between anecdote versus actual data, biased reporting, not to mention absolute versus relative risk. Like, okay, like let's say only one out of your 10,000 person Facebook group would normally have a heart attack, which I don't think is an unreasonable way of describing it in the next 10 years. If it's 10 people out of that group, are you going to notice? Who's going to post for them? Are they regular posters? Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
And
if they die,
I've seen this so many
like,
times. I've seen this so many times that there's like Twitter threads where it's like somebody who's like, this is so weird. My LDL was about 350 for the last decade, but I'm lean and I just had a heart attack. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe the fact that I was doing everything I possibly could to raise my LDL and not treat it for 10 years had something to do with it. Like, I've seen all these threads where these people who are like really active in these kind of communities that are really big on LDL denial, they do have heart attacks, they have cardiac events, and it seems to me like some of the people in the in group kind of resent them for it because they're like, of all the things you decided to do that, makes us look bad. And then they'll a lot of times just be like, he probably just had like a hereditary thing, you know? And it's
Mm,
like, it doesn't matter if there's 1 or 10 or 20, it's going to be written off no matter what. But yeah, Helms,
yeah.
it was, I know I have a flair for the dramatic, and sometimes I can get a bit incredulous when I see things that are just painfully unscientific. But I think that was a really egregious instance of just like, what are we doing here? Like,
The reason why it's egregious, Trex, is because it's not like someone debating, like for example, I've been kind of shocked at this whole movement of like, oh, we've used this flawed mechanistic understanding of hypertrophy so that I've pigeonholed myself into training that is low volume, not going to failure because I'm afraid of fatigue, and maybe now considering not doing the eccentric phase. And I'm like, okay, so you are lining up all of the things that are going to essentially reduce the stimulus, and you're just not going to grow as much. So what's the cost? You know, you make 50% of the gains you otherwise would have, and you maybe do or don't know that, and then 3 years from now you're like, oh, maybe I was following the wrong people, and my biceps could be an inch bigger. Like,
yeah,
not, oh, I have an obituary as my sole remaining existence on the planet,
right.
unfortunately. So yeah, this is a bigger deal than that.
Yeah, quite a gamble for sure. And Helms, one last thing I want to mention here, just speaking of just the wild things going on in the science slash
Mm.
fitness world. Folks, if you haven't been checking in on Front Page Fitness, you're doing yourself a disservice. It's a new podcast hosted by me and Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple, our fellow colleague at the Mass Research Review. Lauren's blowing up. At this rate, she is going to be running Instagram. She's just on a rocket ship to the moon right now. And one of the reasons she's blowing up, first of all, she makes great content on Instagram. Go give her a follow. But on top of that, she is making content in an area that is just chaos right now. Helms, it is pure chaos on the
Yeah.
internet. Women's health, a lot of topics coming up. Should you be adjusting your training proactively on the basis of your menstrual cycle phase? What is happening in menopause? How should they be training and eating in menopause? I've heard something about eating certain seeds in different parts of your menstrual phase or your menstrual cycle. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there, and Lauren is doing her best. She's fighting the good fight, trying to kind of correct some of the nonsense going on out there. But Front Page Fitness is one of the outlets where she's been talking about some of those topics, and it's just crazy out there. I mean, it is, Helms, you mentioned before we started recording, kind of chatting offline. For whatever reason, it's like, people kind of took this little grain of truth, which is that biological females and biological males, there are diverging characteristics. There are distinctions that exist, and therefore we should throw out everything we know and just start from scratch and treat women as if they're a species that's frankly never been studied, and we couldn't possibly know how they might respond to any stimulus whatsoever, which is really not the way you want to do it. You probably want to start more from a basis of assumed similarity with the openness to uncovering distinctions as we do more of this research. And it is true, there's a lot of areas of study where participant pools and participant populations have been predominantly male, and we do need to correct that and get more original raw data collected in female cohorts. But yeah, just to put a finer point on it, a concrete example, one of the things we had to address on the podcast was, does energy balance work in women? Just like the basic
Yeah.
calories in, calories out. And it's just really wild. Like, when you look at, training and nutrition for males versus females, by far a lot more similarities than there are differences. There are some distinctions here and there. Some of those are physiological, biological. Some of them are sociological. There are definitely instances where I train every client as an individual, and I might say, a lot of my female clients over the years have trended in this direction. A lot of males have trended in that direction in terms of their preferences, what their goals are, the ways they like to train. So some of that's sociological. Some of the training characteristics are physiological. But yeah, Helms. I mean, the one thing I can say for Lauren is she will not be bored. Because this stuff is not it's not slowing down. It's getting more egregious as it goes. Have you witnessed any of this stuff out in the wild?
A tremendous amount. Yeah, the one thing I can do is to ask all of the Iron Cult is protect Lauren because she is
Yeah.
going out into waters where she's going to be getting, let's just say, both barrels from two different ends. So I have seen this to answer your question, Trex, and as I have been questioning lately, my question is often why. I seek to understand because it helps me not just get angry, and also I think quite importantly, especially in these contentious times, the principle of charity is so important. We cannot assume malice when ignorance is potentially the cause, and when you approach someone who is defending something, promoting something, or just simply confused from a position of ignorance with good intentions, when you tell them they have bad intentions, that will go poorly and it'll just add more drama, stress, stigma, and division to an already, like you said, fiery and confusing debate. And I think the reason why we're seeing these things right now, where fundamentals are being questioned, is because grains of truth turn into talking points, and there's an element of outrage and activism that is understandably present as well. Like you said, there is a pretty big issue where we have far more sports science and sports nutrition, specifically research on men than women broadly. There are areas where that's absolutely not true. Like if you want to know, and
Somewhere it's
interestingly enough,
inverted. Yeah.
exactly, like if you want to know about relative energy deficiency, low energy availability, and the biological consequences, we have tremendously more data because it started with the female athlete triad on female athletes. If you want to know about the effects of middle age, not necessarily being in your last 1 to 3 decades of life, but being in your 40s and 50s, we have far more data on women because of the unique effects of menopause. And these things are growing. But I think the typical person hears that 70 to 80% of the research broadly in sports science, sports nutrition, exercise science is on men. They go, well, what the hell? Like all this data is that's just not fair. That's not what our institutions are supposed to be doing. And we also see that for the longest time, it was a boys' club. The people who are getting PhDs in strength and conditioning and sports nutrition are often men. And there's some weird disconnects because the vast majority of dietitians and the slight majority of personal trainers are women. And last time I checked, at least half of the clients in both cases are probably going to be women as well because they represent about half the world. So that disparity is frustrating. And I can only understand that frustration from a attempt at being empathetic rather than experiencing that because I have plenty of data to read from that I can have extreme confidence in. So that is there. And so it is seen as a duty and an important thing for people to do research on women right now. And I think there's so many really, really good academics and new PhDs and new leaders who are doing that. But there's also a lot of people who are ringing the bell, saying this is a big issue. We need to build up our knowledge on women, but with a much more broad brush and not understanding where, why, when, how that matters. And, fundamental understanding of thermodynamics, the function of nutrients, the way that adaptation to a stimulus works. Some of these things, it can be very controversial to state it's totally different in women, and that can be weaponized. And in some cases, it is being weaponized, but in other cases, it's just being misunderstood or people are questioning in it. And the thing that we're seeing broadly in the realm of science communication, we're having podcast advertisers, we're just having a well-known popularity and understanding that science is sexy right now, can be sold well, and there's a very predictable formula. It's just occurring rapidly in this space at a very fast speed. Um, so the thing that frustrates me is I see a lot of genuinely confused people.
Yeah.
They're like, well, I've heard this from this person, and I've heard this from you, Lauren, and I can't distinguish between the two of you because this person does actually also have a PhD or an MD after their name. They seem to be science based from the outside, and they do have even some cases a reference that they're talking about, and they may even publish. But what you're saying seems to contradict it, and I don't understand why. So one thing that I love that Lauren is doing, and that I think she's really fighting the good fight, is she continually goes back to what should be the standard of evidence. What should a responsible science communicator or especially researcher be doing? What type of evidence will we need to make this claim? So she is concurrently trying to educate the audience on better identifying who are the appropriate leaders in this space and who are not. How can you know, and how do you check these claims? The only positive I will say is that a large portion of the audience in this space are women who are in their 40s and 50s and science interested. And I think there is probably going to be a higher level of critical thinking, understanding, and the ability to course correct on some of this stuff than me, for example, fighting with people on TikTok who have really strong claims in their 20s about anatomy and physiology, who have never read the research at all and can't discern between anybody. And having a really, really, jacked physique is seen as at least as good as a PhD,
Right.
and maybe sometimes better. And you're having this whole very different culture than what Lauren's operating in. So I do have a little more optimism there than what I'm currently seeing in the fitness space on TikTok. I think that's like, oh, geez,
Are
but
you on TikTok?
no, I just get
Okay.
exposed to it.
Okay.
I
Right.
can't.
Yeah, I would have been very surprised to learn that. So that makes sense. Yeah, no, she's fighting the good fight. It's always an uphill battle, but yeah, like you said, she a lot of times like she's just saying like, "Hey, do you have a citation for that? Hey, anything that's not in mice, or like, and then
Yeah.
like just asking a lot of questions that kind of expose people, not in a malicious way, but just like, hey, you're kind of saying this with a lot of confidence, and there's really no research to suggest that what you're saying is true. And there's actually some research to suggest it's not true. And the closer you get to humans, the worse it looks. So, like, come on. But
And she's
yeah,
doing no personal attacks. She is simply holding people's feet to the fire about the evidence. And the closest thing that she's done to a personal attack is saying, hey, this is what a science communicator should do. This is what your obligations and responsibilities are. This is best practice for making claims. And people have unfairly responded. And here's the frustrating part. The connection to feminism. And, you and I can easily get in trouble by making firm statements about this. So this is just what I am seeing is I have seen her being called out as not supporting other women who are, stepping into the space as prominent science communicators.
well, I can't.
And
No one can accuse me of not being a feminist or hating women because I'm married to a woman. So like, I'm good, and my mom's a woman.
I also have both of those things going for me.
Yeah, so I'm fine.
And not to mention, your cat is
Two
which
two female
how
cats.
do they identify? They both identify
Yeah.
as female cats.
Yep, little Chai and Izzy.
You know what? You know what?
So I'm good, but go ahead. If you want to get yourself in trouble, go on.
Yeah, I actually both my cats were brothers. They're male,
Yeah.
so there's a little insight into my potential misogyny that I'm going to try not to add any additional ammunition
Yeah.
to. But I will say this: I have seen people claim that by questioning the claims of science communicators who are women and trying to produce information for women's health and holding their feet to the fire, that Lauren is not supporting women. I think that's quite frustrating. I have seen the
She's
claim
been called a misogynist many times. Yeah.
yeah, which is pretty frustrating as someone who is
Yeah.
trying to help women get good information that is accurate. I have also seen the general stance that if you promote information that could be misconstrued as saying that oh, men and women are the same, that you are also being sexist. And
Yeah.
that is one that kind of bounces back and forth. Either, you're saying there's differences and that is sexist, or you're saying there's not differences and that's sexist. And I think this is one of those times where we just really have to rely on nuance and say, listen, the data are what the data are. And what we do with that is what's sociologically relevant.
Yeah.
The narratives we put around that. And if we go into that with let's commit to truth first, and then let's do what's right and support people, you're going to be okay. But I think that's where you often see science and activism conflict. We've seen this also in the health at every size movement. That can be weaponized in either direction.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, we see this with race, we see this with class, and of course, we see this with gender and sex. So it is something that is not new, but it is quite different, I would say, to see one person who's quite close to us in the midst of it. And I would say she's handling it with grace. She's doing a great job. But please, Colt, protect this woman.
Yes.
Lauren's doing important work in an important time.
Go to bat for Lauren to the extent you can. All right, Helms. Let's. What do you say we dive into some questions here? How do you feel about
Let's
questions?
do it.
Hold your feet to the
I've got
fire. Hold you to account.
Yeah, I've got the Iron Culture one open. You want me to go through some things as you look through the mass research review? Or you
Yeah,
got
yeah.
some stuff.
Let's hear it.
Cool. So Eduardo has asked this numerous times, and I have not had the opportunity to get to it. He's specifically asked about when we're talking about studies on hypertrophy. Typically we describe trained individuals as one of two ways or a combination. What strength are they? Basically a multiplier of their body weight on lifts, or in sometimes more specific powerlifting studies, a Wilks score, or in more modern times, some of the more modern coefficients used by the IPF, or the number of years they've been training. He says, but what about how much muscle they have relative to their own potential? And he actually suggests, this is a shout out to something old school that I love and I really was interested in. Someone I've actually talked to, Casey Butt's formula. Casey Butt is a mathematician who developed a formula based upon wrist and ankle, if I recall correctly, and maybe a few other anthropometrics relative to the mass that you could achieve using pre-steroid era, like silver bronze age-ish bodybuilders, and then
He's
also
speaking
trying
your
to,
language.
yes,
Yeah.
and also trying to validate that to the degree that one can in current drug-tested bodybuilders and seeing where they're at. And from what he presents, it holds up pretty well on an individual basis. Now, here's the thing, Eduardo. The reason why this isn't used is because it hasn't actually been scientifically validated, and there's no data on women. And it's very difficult to prove that someone is, okay, they are drug-free. And Casey Butt's formulas are also based upon people who have reached extreme levels of muscularity. So when you look at the formulas, they're saying, okay, if you have an ankle and a wrist measurement of this, and you have the same genetic potential as Steve Reeves or as Reg Park or as these champion bodybuilders, here's your potential. But what Casey will acknowledge, because I've talked about this, is that is your potential relative to what has been observed in the top level bodybuilders. It may or may not be what your actual potential is. So there are some methodological issues with it, and the big one is just that we don't have any data on women. So if we did want to say, let's say we did use the Casey Butt formula on a bunch of people, we would not be telling you how developed they were relative to their potential. We would be telling you how well developed they were to similar anthropometric characteristic champion level natural bodybuilders. And that information is not the same as how well trained are they. You could do the same thing with the fat-free mass index, right? And obviously that's fraught with the assumptions about what is a quote-unquote limit. But if you had a cohort that was all around 24, you wouldn't say, let's assume that we do take the incorrect idea that 25 is a limit. We wouldn't say they're nearly the limit. We would just say relative to other people, they're really muscular. But individuals have different limits. So that's why that's not used. So we have to have some way of describing it. And until we can, use epigenetics, anthropometrics, and some type of profile of someone to say, okay, here's how much muscle you should be able to carry naturally, we won't be able to have that data confidently just by those methodological limitations.
Yeah, and I will say I've talked to a number of really solid researchers who have put a lot of thought into this question. I've had more than a couple that I've had like pretty in-depth discussions with where they're like, what should I be doing to make sure that my trained people are trained and my
Mm,
untrained people are untrained? Untrained's easier. Do you lift weights? But with training status, I'm very much in favor. I wish the field would move toward adopting kind of a two-level screening system where it's like you've been training for X amount of time and you can lift Y% of your body weight. You know what I mean? Like I think it makes
that's
sense
what we do.
because you will find folks who are like, let's be honest, Helms. I hate to say it. Don't want to black pill anybody here. You're gonna find some folks who have been training for some time and they have not been making training adaptations. That's a nice way of saying there's no gains to be found here, despite the fact that you've been,
Yep.
frankly, spinning your wheels in the gym for a few years. So number of years doesn't really tell you what you're getting in terms of how much a person has adapted to resistance training. Same thing goes with strength. Like you may actually find some random folks who are like pretty strong and they have not done any lifting. They're just kind of out of the box, a lot stronger than the average person. And so you will find that strength is not necessarily a perfect indicator of training status. So if you really want to triangulate on people who have been in the gym a while and are strong, I think it makes the most sense to, I mean, sometimes with researchers, you got to remind them not to outthink the room. You have to say like, well, what do you want to do here? Like you're categorizing them as trained. Why? Like, well, I just want to make sure that they've been lifting for a while and they're pretty strong. Okay, then do that. I think sometimes with researchers, their intelligence is their biggest strength and their biggest flaw because sometimes they'll overthink stuff like this and
Yeah.
tie themselves in knots. And it's like, I think you know what you want here. You're just you're kind of locked into a paradigm that you don't agree with.
It has to be completely defensible, and I'm solving a problem that I have created to
Yeah.
solve. Yeah. No, 100%.
All
I got some
right.
more, or you want to jump on
I just
on
want
one?
to give a huge shout out to Yajoy, who says, "Imagine hanging out in the Iron Culture live chat instead of here in the Mass live chat. Couldn't be me." The hashtag evidence based elite and iron imbeciles. So that's a real shot
Wow.
across the bow. Scumlord Studio says, "Aw," with a lot of W's. That's so cute. I have no idea what they might be referring to in this episode. Could be the cat content, could be something else entirely. It's impossible to say. Let's see. We had someone who asked a question training related, Helms. This is an interesting one. I haven't seen this one for a while. And of course, before I do that, the Greek Trojan tipping the cap for our top tier countdown jingle, which is a staple here at Iron Culture now. So Dexter said, "Do you see a point in strengthening the core rotation pattern for athletic activities like punching, or can you just do side bends for oblique hypertrophy and then the actual sports movement to strengthen more of the rotational piece?" Do you find yourself on a regular basis prescribing with different clients with different goals any kind of rotational core strengthening movements?
I think anytime someone has a performance goal that includes rotational force development, again, I don't find myself doing this because I almost exclusively work with people who have very sagittal goals, even when they are performance oriented.
Well, you got to make that quarter turn.
You're right.
Yeah.
So okay, here's the most athletic thing I recently prescribed was thoracic mobility work for a bodybuilder I'm working with who can't open up on side symmetry as much as I would like them
Wow.
to show the V taper from the side.
Yeah.
So I was like, hey, get the foam roller out or lie on the side and do the open arm thing, try to touch the ground. And once you can touch the ground without letting your hip shift, try to get that side relaxed. So there was a moment of S&C that was applied in a way that S&Cs would be
Look at
mad
you, the
about.
supple Helms,
That's right. That's right.
turning over a new
Kelly
leaf.
Starrett reference.
Yeah.
Turning over a whole new degree of thoracic rotation.
Yeah.
So I think that, so I generally kind of like where this question asker is at. Like, oh, I would just directly train something for hypertrophy, and for performance, I would train a movement pattern that would transfer to it. The only thing I didn't really like about their question is they kind of framed it as all the muscles that do rotation are the same as me doing a side bend.
Right.
And that is where that kind of the embedded assumption in that question is not the same. There are muscles that when they contract will result in rotation, and there are muscles that when they contract will result in lateral flexion. However, if your goals are hypertrophy oriented, I don't think you need to be doing any intentional extreme rotation things. There are some outside cases where I think you can get a slightly greater stretch on a muscle if you have some rotational components, because we're not a perfect, 3D like XY plane, construction. For example, if you look at the way the lats sit on you, they're sitting across a rib cage, attaching down, and you could probably stretch them by reaching across your body at a slight angle
Yeah,
with a single arm pull down. But that's not the same as you need to do rotational work to grow these muscles as a bodybuilder.
absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm going to get back into training real heavy starting on June. I've got a date picked, middle of June.
Ooh.
I've got some stuff I got to take care of. I'm obscenely busy at the moment. It is truly treacherous. And then I got a little trip, and after that, I'm gonna do the official big time Trex comeback with skin in the game. I can't talk about exactly what that's gonna look like, but it will be a public extravaganza. But when I get back into
Oh,
it,
wow. So you are committing to something that's going to keep your skin in the game. You
yes,
have a date set, and
yes,
you're going to be starting training, and you haven't even told me about it yet. I am
no,
excited.
no, it's top secret stuff. But but I am committing to it, and there will be people to hold me accountable publicly and shaming me publicly. So, but when I get back into it, one of the things I'm really adamant about doing this time, especially because of my unique background in recent history, is I really want to build back some of my general athleticism that I had back in the day. I cannot prove this. I have no data in my back pocket here, but I do think that as I trained in such a severely limited way for so long, doing just the same
Mm,
kind of repetitive motions and ranges of motions, and there were certain muscle groups that just the way I gravitated toward training got completely ignored in ways that totally hampered my athleticism. Where it was like, you know what, I could squat, 475 without much of a warm up right now, but if shit hit the fan and I needed to sprint left, I'd be wrecked. You know what I mean? Like not that I don't have the cardiovascular. Like I would pull a groin and a hamstring if I just tried to move in that direction on a dime. And I really feel like as a general principle of training, that's probably not a good place to be in. If you're building up so many areas of just, I don't even want to like use buzzwords and say imbalances or anything like that, but just fundamental weakness of areas that are not being trained or being trained in such limited ranges of motion that doing a vaguely athletic thing would bring you severely out of your comfort zone. I just think that's generally a terrible idea. So one of the things I'm going to be doing when I dive back in is really building up some more of that athleticism, specifically hoping that it's going to help me maintain a lot of strength and mobility, kind of from the rib cage down, where I've had so many
mm.
issues with, hip and groin and lower abdomen issues. Like I'm trying to like actually get back into it and be a person who can be athletic in multiple planes of motion in multiple directions. And I'm going to test to see how strongly I feel after the fact, if that's actually been a worthwhile move. So maybe it'll be helpful. Maybe it'll just be a little side quest, but the goal is to get back in the best shape of my life and to actually feel like I'm reasonably athletic rather than a person who can do three specific tasks very well and nothing outside of that. Does that make sense?
I not only does it make sense, but I'm here for it. I'm excited for it. I'm in support, and you won't catch me shaming you. It'll only be positive reinforcement,
Beautiful.
all carrot, no stick, my man. And I actually have a related question to that, tangentially.
Sure.
In the recently disparaged Iron Culture chat, which I think is just unfortunate that the evidence-based community hasn't learned from being so high and mighty and sitting in their ivory tower. Yeah, hopefully we can learn from the future. But anyway, 12 Piece Minnesota asks how to fix anterior pelvic tilt. Are building stronger posterior chain overrated when it comes to improving posture of daily living? Posture. probably something you don't need to worry about. Anterior pelvic tilt, not necessarily something to fix. I'm based on this question, I know that will be a bit of a shock. There's a lot of promoted information online related to what is quote unquote good posture, bad posture, and things like upper cross syndrome, anterior pelvic tilt. And these are things that I would not prospectively try to fix. I would address actual issues in performance, pain, problems with activities of daily living. And there does need to be nuance in this. And I would refer you to our prior episodes where we said, listen, you can have a performance imbalance. Like if there's a 25% decrement between left and right and a prior injury, that's not something to just hand wave away with the kind of the evidence-based lack of nuance, pain science, typical thing that people say. But this is one of those things that is absolutely probably absolutely probably, listen to me, I can't help myself. This is absolutely
I'm 100%
misinformation.
certain that there is some probability of the following.
Yes, no, I'll be very clear. What you probably want to do to feel good is to be able to move between different positions, especially if you're sedentary. So stand up, move around between periods of inactivity. But I wouldn't worry if you're a little hunched at your desk or if you walk around and don't have extreme postural deviation that also coincide with pain. The typical person has a lordotic spine, a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt, and you can get convinced very easily by YouTube that that's a problem. It is not. Nothing needs to be done here. So not only is it overrated to try to build your posterior chain to fix anterior pelvic tilt, but the underlying premise is something that is false, and you want to build a posterior chain if that's your goal. Anything you want to add to that, Trex?
Not at all. You got anything cooking in the iron culture chat over there?
I do, and this one you probably will want to add to, and I'll give a little preamble, and I'll give you some space because I know that you've had actually far more experience
Set it up
firsthand on
and
this
clear the
topic.
lane. I'm going in.
I got you. I got you. All right. Christian Benyon asks, or sorry, Bainan, we know BIA is not a great method for body fat percentage due to inaccuracy, but if you were to use a BIA scale every day under the same conditions, could you get a decent accuracy by averaging to eliminate noise? So it's a question not only about statistical reliability, but also BIA. So the first thing I will say is that, Christian, check out some of the awesome work by Grant Tinsley. They actually have one paper, I think they looked at like 15 different BIA and BIS single and multi-frequency and research and commercial grade devices. So simply stating that BIA is not a great method for body fat percentage due to inaccuracy is conditionally true. And there are a small number of higher end commercial grade BIA devices that are decent. And there's actually a decent number of research grade BIA and BIS methods, especially ones that have electrode sensors in the upper and lower body that hold your body position pretty consistent and have been validated against DEXA that are comparable to DEXA. I wouldn't say as good. So that statement kind of needs to be couched a bit because not all BIA is created equal, and you really do have to dig into the methods of the individual study. But I'm going to let you, I'm getting out of the lane here. I've made a hole. I
Yeah.
did something related to football, and then you take it and run down the field goal soccer.
Yeah, so clear the lane. I was referring to basketball. I'm going to play some ISO ball here. Just give me the rock. Yeah.
I don't know,
So
sports.
with BIA and BIS, it's now these are technologies that can always get better. But generally speaking, I tend not to use them in household applications. If it's a research application, we're saying, listen, because of the state we live in, DEXA is kind of off the table. We're kind of stuck between a high-end research grade BIS device, with the 4 points of contact, or maybe a bod pod. I don't personally see those as a huge difference either way. I'd much rather have a DEXA than either of the two, as long as I was in a state where I could get away with using it and not having my hands tied. In some states, you actually have to have like a license, there's a whole lot of protections over who can operate it. They treat it as if you're doing like a full-blown x-ray. So it's like you have to be like a
Yeah.
radiologist to do it, which is absolute nonsense based on the radiation dose, but to each their own. But anyway, yeah, just the BIA and BIS devices I've worked with, they're an interesting little novelty. You can use them if like a nice BIS device to look at total body water. There's there's a lot of fundamental assumptions underlying BIA and BIS that are really difficult to get around unless you're going to just kind of algorithm it to hell, where it's like, okay, we're going to take the kind of reactance and impedance, the raw values under the hood, and run them through this kind of predictive algorithm based on population level norms. So those can keep getting better and better at a population level, but then the next question is always, well, what population? They are going to be population specific. Some of the, if you like crack open an old textbook that's like just about body composition analysis, the stuff you read about BIA and BIS will be kind of mind-blowing. Like, for example, BIA and BIS assume that the human body is a series of cylinders, perfect cylinders. That is not my experience observing and owning a human body. It does not strike me as a cylinder or even a series of cylinders. So there's a lot of like fundamental assumptions about it that underpin that lack of validity, more so, like, especially if we're talking about like validity versus reliability. You could have a reliable device that gives you the wrong number very consistently, and yeah, you can average that, and you have an average of many wrong numbers. And to the extent that's useful to you, I'm not so sure. But
You can see progress.
yeah, maybe you can track some progress with it. But what I've come to find over many years of doing body comp with a lot of different methods, because like now you can even do you can get an estimate of body fat with doubly labeled water, on top of doing bod pod, calipers, ultrasound, DEXA, you name it, underwater weighing. Unless you're doing something like DEXA or ultrasound, where you're getting like a real clear image of what's going on, for at-home use, I think usually you can go pretty far with a scale that tells you how much you weigh, clothing that tells you how it's fitting, a mirror seeing how you're looking, and a tape measure if you really want to go all out. And even if you're like, hey, no, I want to do like the full-blown everything in the kitchen sink, what you do, honestly, in my opinion, is you track your body weight, track how you're looking and feeling in your clothes, you track some circumferences, and you get an old pair of spring-loaded calipers, and you just figure out, when I do a good pinch of my, some key sites, is the number getting smaller? It doesn't matter if you're converting it to a body fat percentage, if the tricep fat thickness used to be 12 units and now it's 9 units, you got leaner as long as you did the pinch right. So that would be my recommendation. I've seen when someone, here's the way I'd put it for a concise answer, Helms. When someone says, I'd like to use BIS or BIA for the following application, I find that 99 times out of 100, there's a better solution for that application. So the question about whether or not BIA or BIS would work for that, to me, is beside the point, because I can find you something that's cheaper or as cheap that does a better job or as good a job.
Yep. No, I totally agree. The time that BIA or BIS is useful is if you are a researcher, and you have a version of the device which is reasonably reliable and is reasonably valid compared to quote-unquote gold standard metrics. There's been some agreement testing, and that's what you got. And you have a large enough sample to where the error is smaller than the observed change that you can anticipate finding between groups. So I've got a few other minor comments in here that we can go through.
I wanted to hit one, if you don't mind, from the after hours portal, and you can keep
absolutely
aggregating some.
You give me just a few. I want to get some shouts, because you had the comment that crapped on Iron Culture, and I want to point out that these are good people. These are good people. We had multiple people.
There's fine people on both sides of this whole thing.
That's true.
Yeah.
I will say this though. That is a tremendous kitty. I think they said its name is Chai. Can we get a cat reveal? What's his or her name? Cat reveal, question marks, with also exclamation points. And people generally just loving Chai. Yeah. So we should not disparage. They're giving shout outs to Agata Sitco and your cat. So, and also comments about Marcus Rule being able to have a kid after his career, saying, hey, it's not all doom and gloom if you're an IFBB pro, even the biggest one I'm aware of all time. So there you go.
Honestly, that's pretty wild. I did not know that Marcus Rule had a kid after his career. And I would imagine purely based on what that man looked like during his career. He was experimenting with some higher than TRT doses at his prime. And so the reason I'm really interested by that is because, we can debate about, what's the effect of long-term testosterone production, but the effect on, sperm production is so dramatic. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's a
Yes.
very substantial effect. So it's very surprising to see that after 20 years probably of suppression, that was able to come back. So that's pretty wild. Assuming it was a natural process of conception and whatnot. But yeah.
Yeah, they actually adopted. No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
Sorry.
there's you could someone with a lot of foresight might freeze specimens before they decide to do
True.
but that would have been a while ago for him to actually do that. I
Yes.
don't know what kind of services they had for that. But anyway,
Yeah,
I don't want
I
to talk
think
anymore about
probably not.
Marcus Rule sperm. Can we just move on?
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry I brought
I
it
feel
up.
like you're dwelling on it. Uh, all right. Do you have more shout outs or can I answer this hard hitting question?
No, no, no. You go for it.
Okay. So we had a question really putting me to task here, twisting my arm. So, how do you reconcile the constrained energy model when the Hadza had 2 to 3 times the physical activity of sedentary Western populations and a similar total daily energy expenditure? So, given that, high activity, relatively modest energy expenditure in hunter gatherers, how do you reconcile endurance athletes who are slamming thousands of calories, tons of carbohydrate, and they are, having these really, really high energy expenditures and covering crazy mileage? So why are we seeing energy constraint in one group, but this other group is burning way more calories than the average sedentary American adult? And to their credit, they asked, is this a case of total daily energy expenditure being constrained if calorie intake is constrained? And that is the kind of extra layer where uncharitable people say that Herman and anyone who associates with him, including me, are a bunch of morons. Is they
Hmm.
don't take that extra step of what is the role of calorie intake and how it impacts that constraint. So the short answer is my current understanding of the constrained energy expenditure model, and I think it's better than most. I share a wall with the guy who's the brains behind. I won't speak for him, but my current understanding of it is we tend to see a lot of this constraint in two instances. Most like the real large magnitudes of constraint. One is when energy intake is very limited, right? So hunter-gatherer communities where caloric resources are fairly scarce, or instances where people are actively trying to lose weight. And Helms, you've covered in mass these weight loss trials that do exercise only, where we find that they're only losing 25 to 50% of what we would expect them to lose. We're seeing not only constraint of expenditure, but also increase in hunger and energy intake as well. So when calories are being restricted, either intentionally or just because of scarcity, that's where we see a lot of this constrained energy expenditure in people who are highly active. When it comes to endurance athletes, we still may see it, but you have to keep in mind these folks build their life around the idea of fueling for this activity. Really high level
Yep.
endurance athletes. We will still see it if their workload exceeds their ability to refuel what they're doing. So do we see this in individuals who are clearly expressing manifestations of low energy availability? Indeed, we do. And sometimes that's just from pure underfueling. People who think they can eat 3,000 calories a day and train for a marathon and be putting in crazy mileage, elite marathon training. We also will see that, though, in people who maybe they are trying to refuel, but they are doing so much training volume in these specific time windows that they literally cannot. Like, they just cannot get the calories down to actually fuel their training. What's limiting that? It's debatable. When I say that, I mean the inability to actually replace all those calories through dietary intake. Is there something physiologically limiting that? Like, does the gut actually have a maximum uptake of calories per unit time? Or is it just that people feel utterly repulsed by food once they eat beyond a certain amount? That's an area where I don't have a ton of clarity, and I think you could have some really interesting debates there. But absolutely, this model is the energy intake component is a really key element of this model for sure.
Yeah, I got nothing to add there. I think it's just really important for people to understand that um, the Hazda and other hunter-gatherer societies, like the male hunters, they are probably best represented by modern data on the uh, like athletic hypogonadal low energy availability man, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and in practice, the times I've run into similar values where you go like, oh wow, like your step count, your number of exercise sessions per week, and your calorie intake, and your frequency of illness, and your general mood, and all those things really resemble something like that. Is when I see CrossFit competitors with certain behaviors around food who are also trying to stay really lean, and then of course your contest prep bodybuilders who are over leveraging cardio. And then you see very similar numbers, actually, to what is sometimes represented in some of these hunter-gatherer societies. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that's great points.
One thing I'd like to do, Helms, I think it'd be really, really cool to do a doubly labeled water study on bodybuilders who are prepping. Helms, one of these days we need to talk off camera about how it would be feasible to get access to a group of people prepping who are actually going to get super shredded. I'd love to see what their data look like with doubly labeled water, and I may know a guy who could potentially make that happen. So we need to figure out. I'm saying this publicly. I know I'm acting like this is a private conversation, but folks out there, if you feel like you have a good hookup for getting me access to a whole bunch of people who would be doing bodybuilding, hit me up.
We should probably talk to our mutual friend Vil Isola and think about our experiences in Finland.
We
So
absolutely should. Yeah. But I just want to put that out there. I want the world to be clamoring for some bodybuilder doubly labeled water studies because I'm really intrigued at what we might find. Because so far, all we have, to the best of my knowledge, is just kind of like we'll get some RMRs. They're very low. We can clearly see the manifestations of extremely low energy availability across like every physiological system you could imagine. But I would love to see how low those total numbers get and really like juxtapose it with the amount of cardio and the step counts that they're doing. I think we may hit a energy compensation PR if I may.
the PR you never want, but the PR that we
Yeah.
know we'll see if we study this population. And
I
by the
I
way, I
yeah.
think this final comment, this thing that we're talking about, is a great way to reunite the chats of Iron Culture, who are all about the bodybuilding, and the mass office hours, who are all about the science, and realize that we're on the same team, folks.
We are absolutely. Well, Helms, I tell you what, man, we probably ought to wrap it up here. We'd be going almost 90 minutes here. Time flies. Really
Right?
appreciate everyone's positive comments for Chai. I would offer to bring her on more, but she has a knack for unplugging things and knocking over things like cameras that have cords dangling from them. So really just I'm amazed at the low level of chaos with her in the room. And if you're watching on YouTube and I excused myself briefly when Helms was talking, there was an opportunity to shut the door and I had to leap at it. So this went extremely well, much more smoothly than I could have possibly hoped for. Helms, anything to say to the good people before we wrap up for tonight?
Just thank you everyone for joining us live, as you always do, and also the really informative and helpful comments and questions that make this the interactive podcast experience that I love to be a part of on a weekly basis.
Absolutely. Everyone, thanks so much for being in the live chat. It absolutely makes the show what it is. Now, if you like the show, you'd like to support it in some way, there's many ways to do it. You can join us in the live chat, of course. You can like, rate, subscribe, review, catch it later on YouTube or catch it later on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like. Give it that good old-fashioned 5-star rating. You know you want to. And if you're not feeling 5 stars, maybe just wait on the rating until you're in the mood for a good 5-star rating. Of course, you can also send us some questions in the portal over at massresearchreview.com/ironculture if you want to submit a question after hours, which is where I got that one about exercise energy compensation. Now, if you really love the show and you want to be a top tier, gold star, platinum member, supporter of the show, you can become a member of the Mass community. That is our monthly digital publication, comes out every single month, first of the month. And it's got audio, it's got video, it's got articles covering the newest and most useful and most important research impacting health, fitness, and tangentially related topics. So check that out at massresearchreview.com. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a fantastic week, and we will be back in approximately 7 days.